Hey, what's up guys? Alex here with a new video, and today we're doing another comparison. This is one I've been wanting to do for quite some time. Today we're comparing the Sony 50mm f1.2 G Master against my all-time favorite lens, the Canon RF 51.2. Will there be a clear winner? Let's find out. If you're new to the channel, I am a portrait photographer based out of Orlando, Florida, and a retired wedding photographer. I've been shooting with Canon for the last 4 years, or to be exact, when the Canon EOS R came out, and the RF 51.2 has been a staple in my kit. When I was doing weddings, over 80% of my images were shot with the RF 51.2, and I've always said it is my ride or die lens and I can do anything with that lens. You're probably thinking this video is going to be biased, but no, it's not. There's actually a clear winner, and we have the image samples to back it up. Let's kick things off. We'll start off with pricing. So the Sony here is actually cheaper. The Sony retails for $1,998 and the Canon retails for $2,299. So it's a whole $300 more. And I'm surprised that Canon's been getting away with this because this is across the board with their RF lenses. I think they're some of the best, but Sony's definitely delivering great lenses and cheaper lenses. So the Sony here is going to take a big W because $300 is a lot of money. Moving on to build quality and ergonomics, both these lenses are a little bit on the larger side. They are 1.2 lenses, so you got to give it some slack here and expect them to be a little bit larger. If you were to compare it to the Nikon, that thing is a behemoth. So if you look at the Sony and the Canon, they're on the smaller side when you compare what Nikon's doing. Anyways, both lenses take a little bit of a different approach on their design philosophy. So the Canon lens is smooth plastic, minimal switches, and it has the Canon's new control ring, which you can customize to do a variety of things. ISO, exposure compensation, aperture. The lens overall, it's lasted me for the last 4 years. I have zero negative things to say about build quality. I do have to point out my least favorite part of this lens is its focusing system. Not that it's slow, but its focusing system is just out of place for a modern lens. What I mean by that is the actual front element of the lens moves back and forth. You feel it on the lens, you hear it, and I'm not sure why Canon went with this design instead of making it an internal lens element. This concerned me when I first got the lens because I thought dust would get inside. After owning it for all this time, there's zero dust inside the lens. It's just a little bit annoying that you hear it and you feel it when you're using it. The Sony, on the other hand, has an internal element, so there's no moving front element. Its focusing system, you don't hear it, you don't feel it, so it definitely feels more modern there. And instead of having the control ring the way the Canon lens has, you're stuck with an aperture ring. So if you like that, cool, you have an aperture ring that could be declicked for video or clicked for photo. If you don't like it, you're stuck with an aperture ring. So I think the Canon has more versatility with the control ring, and the Sony definitely has a better feel because the focusing element is internal versus the Canon where you kind of see it and hear it. And it's a toss-up here. I think they're both great builds, both decent size for what they are, 1.2 lenses. And I'm going to declare this one a win for the Sony because of the focusing element. It's annoying on the Canon, and if you have this lens, you know what I'm talking about. Image quality. Here's where we're gonna get to the meat and potatoes. So every image I'm gonna show you, I will provide down below as a raw file for you to play with so you can see it on your own screen. YouTube's gonna compress these files. I want you to actually see them, so feel free to download the raw samples. Before I do my comparison, I'm gonna play a slideshow labeled A and B, and I want you to try to take a guess to which one is the Sony and which one is the Canon, and let me know in the comments below. I want to see how many of y'all get it right. With that said, let me roll the slideshow. What did y'all think? If you guessed A was a Sony, you were right. For most of these images, they look identical and it's really hard to tell them apart. When the Sony really takes a huge advantage is with flare control and contrast when the sun is hitting the lens directly. And I was surprised at how much better the Sony performed over the Canon in these situations, and I really wasn't expecting it. So let's take a deeper look at some of these images so we can see some of the differences here. Okay, so here we have our first set of images. Sony on the left, Canon on the right. Both these images have been edited with my preset, and if you want to check that out, I have it in the description below. Looking at these two photos, they both look identical. If we were to zoom in and take a look at the image quality, and I try to match them as far as size, because the Sony does have 32 megapixels, you can see that both these lenses look identical. Their background rendering, the sharpness, they are both really, really good. As a matter of fact, the one difference I see here is the Sony has a brighter exposure by just a little bit. Now, the same settings have been applied with my preset here, so the exposure is untouched, and you can see that the Sony's a hair brighter, so the Sony might be bringing in a little bit more light, but other than that, they look identical to me. So let's move on to another set of images. Again, here we have the Sony on the left, Canon on the right, and we're seeing the same thing. They look identical. The Sony is a little bit brighter. We're not going to compare color differences here because we're comparing two different systems, but from a sharpness perspective here, they are both extremely sharp. When you have a lighting scenario like this where the lighting is nice and flat, it is really hard to tell a difference. And these lenses are just doing really, really good. And if you zoom into my wife's necklace here, you're going to see that there is no... Oh, actually, there is a slight green fringing on the Canon, and the Sony controls the green fringing a little bit better. So from the fringing here, you can see that you see it just a hair more on the Canon and not on the Sony. Let's move on to another set where you're going to start seeing big differences. Here in this set, here's where you start really seeing the Sony take a huge leap forward. Both shot with the sun behind my wife, and you can see that the Sony just does not flare. It maintains a ton of contrast. And when you look at the Canon, that sun flare is blooming on top of my wife's head and it's like bleeding into her face, which means you're losing contrast. And this is completely up to you stylistically. If you want to have flare or you want to have that kind of look when you point it at the sun, the Canon will definitely do it. And you're going to see more samples of it here in a second. The Sony is just so controlled. I could not get the Sony to flare at all, which if you're looking for an optically perfect lens, the Sony's going to take the cake here because you can see it. I'm going to zoom into my wife's face and you're going to see how the Sony just maintains that contrast. And with the Canon, you do have that bloom. Now, it looks good, but if you're looking at optical perfection, the Sony's going to win here by a big margin. So let me go ahead and zoom back out, and you can see it right there. Let's move on to another set of images. So I posted these images actually on my Instagram, and everybody guessed it wrong. So they all thought that the Sony was the Canon and that the Canon was the Sony, which was interesting. But looking at these images where there is no direct sunlight hitting the lens, they both look incredible. When you zoom in, they are both incredibly sharp at 1.2. And these are the types of images that just look so dreamy, and nothing to say here. Both look almost identical and really hard to see any difference. Even from the background, you look at the Canon on the right, it has slightly larger bokeh balls. They're football shaped at 1.2, and if you look at the Sony, also football shaped and not as large. So we're nitpicking here. I don't even think that matters, but those are the smallest of differences with these two lenses. Let's go on to another set of images. In this set of images, again, almost identical, hard to see a difference. Both look great, zero complaints. Let's zoom in just to zoom in, but really hard to complain when a 1.2 lens is performing this well. And yeah, nothing to see here. Let's go on to a more challenging set of images. So here again, we have the Sony on the left, Canon on the right, and you're gonna see how the Sony just maintains more contrast. So I had my wife stand on this hill. The sun was kind of poking out behind her, and you're gonna see that on the Sony, if I zoom in, the image is contrasty. It retains everything. And with the Canon, that sun was just there just enough to cause that haze, and it lost contrast, which really surprised me in this image because the sun, it was hitting the element slightly, but not much. And the Sony just, again, handled it perfectly. And on the Canon, you just definitely see more of a bloom from the sun, which very, very interesting here because I was not expecting the difference to be this big with flaring with these lenses at this price point. Let's go on to another set of images. On this set of images, we have the Sony on the left, Canon on the right, and I have the sun coming from the side. And again, you're gonna see that if you look at the sun on the left side of these images, the Sony controls it a lot more. And on the Canon, you have more of a haze, a bloom. It's noticeable, it softens the image, and it's going to be purely up to you if you like that. Personally, like I said, I've used this lens for 4 years. I know how to control it. I know how to work around the lens flare. As a matter of fact, I incorporate it in a lot of my images. I think it looks pretty cool. But if, again, like I said, when we're talking about optical perfection, the Sony here is clearly showing it's a better lens, and it's $300 cheaper. So let's continue on these images so we can see how this flare can get even worse and just how well the Sony manages it. On this image, here's where you really see the difference. I had the sun poking out on the left-hand side, and the Sony just has this beautiful kind of flare and bloom on the left side. And on the Canon, if you take a good look, it completely overpowers the image. We even have a flare coming through the right side of the image, and it changes the skin tones, it changes the tones. Overall, it just softens the image. When I zoom in, you're gonna see that my wife's face is incredibly sharp and contrasty on the Sony, and on the Canon, it's still sharp, but you lose that contrast because that lens flare. And if you look at the right-hand side, like I mentioned, you see that lens flare just take over the whole image. And I'm really surprised at how well the Sony manages this, and it's just pretty incredible. I'm gonna do one more image just so y'all can see both lenses, and then we'll wrap up this video. So here we have our final image, and you're gonna see a little bit of the same. Background blur, rendering, they both look close to identical, but that sun is coming in from the left-hand side. The Sony's maintaining just tons of contrast, and when you look at the Canon, it looks a little hazy because that sun is coming in and just creating that haze. So kind of similar story as the previous images. You can see here that the coatings and whatever Sony did with the flare control is clearly superior than the Canons. And when you're shooting at golden hour and you're shooting directly against the sun, it makes a difference. So with that said, let's go ahead and wrap up this video. My final thoughts. I expected this to be a close call, and when you're talking about image quality, when you're talking about sharpness, it is a very close call. When lighting is flat and you're not pointing these lenses against the sun, these lenses are almost identical. And I firmly believe if you own a Sony system, you should own the 51.2, and if you own a Canon system, you should own the 51.2. Like I said in the beginning of this video, we're gonna have to crown a winner. And the winner here, it's gonna hurt me to say this, is the Sony. From an image quality perspective, it does a lot better with flare control. It's a contrast to your lens, and it's optically perfect. It's hard to find any flaws with this lens. From a build quality perspective, the fact that it doesn't have a focusing element that moves in and out and you feel it and you hear it, I think also gives it an advantage over the Canon. And it makes me believe that from a build quality perspective, it might last longer, you might not get dust. Overall, just a better lens. Does this mean sell all your Canon gear and go to Sony? Absolutely not. The Canon lens, in my opinion, is still a phenomenal lens, and with all gear, you learn to work around its limitations. In this case, the Canon flares. For me, I personally like a lens that can flare, and you can control it. Now, I should say all these photos were shot with their lens hoods. So there's definitely ways to move the lens, ways to take different angles to not get flare and really maintain that image quality. And that's one thing you're gonna have to work around with the Canon. On the Sony side, if you want that lens flare, good luck. It's not gonna happen. This lens is perfect. It's gonna be impossible to get a lens flare. So that's not necessarily a con. It's just something you should be aware of, and doesn't take away from the fact that the Sony lens here, from an optical formula, coatings, is just a better lens. With that said, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. I really enjoyed doing these comparisons between the Sony and the Canon, and I think it's really made it clear that both systems are phenomenal systems. All modern lenses coming out from all manufacturers are just incredible, and we really have no excuse to make great images. I think with that said, we're gonna wrap up this video. As always, please like, please comment, and please subscribe, and I will see you on the next one. Have a good one, guys. Peace.